I'm an avid mountain walker and spend most weekends trekking in the mountains and hills of where I live in Europe. It was a hot Saturday afternoon about 4 summers ago now. I was doing one of my favorite walks, which was about 12 miles long. This area was mainly forestry, but the tracks themselves were gravel. There were no other walkers and only a few cyclists, which was kind of typical with it being so hot. So the first 10 miles were standard. I was at the bottom of a track that would eventually lead to the top of the valley. About 100 meters ahead, I could see a man walking in the same direction. He was tall, thin, and had short hair. He had some sort of limp, but I didn't think much of it, and he was actually walking quite fast, so I probably wouldn't have to overtake him. I carried on up the track. The sun was overhead and it was hot, but the man in front of me kept limping along and was making quick work of the incline. The track started to bend, and I lost sight of the limping man. The track comes up to a choice of two paths, one which leads to a small, often empty parking lot, and the other leads to the top of a valley. As I was about to head to the top of the valley, I heard a loud shout. It was coming from within the forest. I waited a second, and then heard another shout. This time the person was screaming, "No!" My first thought was that guy must have tried taking a shortcut and had fallen over. As I made my way through the thick trees and ferns to see what was up, I stopped dead in my tracks. Up ahead through the trees, I could see the man who was limping ahead earlier. He was sitting down on a log with his head in his hands, and then screamed at the top of his lungs again. He then bolted up and started punching a tree. His face was bright red. He was raging. He then picked up a stick and started to bash it against a tree. I was frozen. I couldn't process what was going on. He just looked really mad. He shouted, "I hate you," and started stomping his feet. I quietly started to make my way back to the track, careful not to fall over or make any loud noises. That man was clearly a lunatic. I thought I would go on the more rarely used tracks towards the parking lot, and then take a shortcut north through the woods, as I figured that was the best way to avoid him. With every step, I became more confident and almost started to laugh about it. Maybe he wanted to let off a bit of steam or vent some anger. After all, the middle of the forest seems like a perfect place to do that, I suppose. As I looked back behind me, I could see the limping man about 25 meters away. He was wading through the brush, pushing branches and ferns aside, following after me. He had a strange snarl on his face, and his head was bobbing up and down between the brush. I couldn't believe what was happening. He must have seen me. There was no other explanation. I was only a mile away from a main road, so I started to speed up and walk a bit faster. I occasionally looked behind me and could see I was putting distance between us. I started to relax finally as I made it off the trail, and that was the last I saw of the man. I still don't know what to make of the situation, but the fact that he followed me through the brush was the most disturbing thing. I've done that same walk over a dozen times since, and I haven't seen him again. I'm a real estate agent who works and lives in a small town in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Occasionally, when I have an appointment with a client close to the highway that goes up near the mountain, I take the opportunity to drive another 30 minutes towards my favorite scenic mountain overlook. It was a rainy day in May, and I needed to assess the progress of a house under construction. I decided after assessing that house that I would head towards the overlook. After driving 10 or so minutes up the mountain, the light rain turned into a pour, making the road slick, thick fog, and extremely difficult driving conditions. 5 minutes passed, and I wasn't far away from the overlook. For the last 25 minutes I had been driving, nobody was behind me until now. A small red truck was tailing my car. I figured I would lose the truck since it would probably continue on the highway as I would turn left towards the overlook. To my unfortunate surprise, it followed me and proceeded to inch even closer to my vehicle. I was slightly panicking as the rain poured even harder, and the fog made it much more difficult to see the road in front of me. 2 minutes away from the overlook, I noticed a white truck with its lights turned on and pulled off to the side of the road. The car looked as though it was waiting for someone, but what a peculiar place to wait since there was nothing there. The red truck was still on my tail, and just as I was sure he would run me off the mountain, I found the overlook to my left, swerved into its parking lot, and let out a sigh of relief. It was a short-lived relief. I looked to my left, and a few yards away, the small red Tacoma truck was parked as well at the overlook parking lot. For a few minutes, I sat in my car thinking maybe they didn't want to continue driving with the bad fog on the road. A few more minutes passed, and the individual driving the red truck opened his door to get outside, and in his arms held a gun. He was a 5'8" grimy man with black hair around his mid-40s, and he was carrying a shotgun. He was making strides towards my car, but I didn't want to wait for him to reach his destination. I trembled with immense fear and immediately started my car and headed out in the direction I came from. The grimy man did not follow me in his small red truck, but the white truck parked off the side of the mountain from earlier was on my tail and driving even more recklessly than the man with the shotgun. The rain was lightening up, but the fog lingered. He drove on my tail for 10 minutes until I finally lost him in the fog and quickly turned right onto the back road. I had lost them and made it home safe without turning into a victim on that mountain. This happened when I was 21 years old. Back then, I believed that I made a rookie mistake, but have since learned my lesson and have taken precautions so that this doesn't happen again. I'm an avid mountain biker and have ridden trails for a while. It's good exercise, and I mostly like to just listen to music and pedal. I would never do time trials or anything like that. I would just keep track of my miles. I decided to go on a day ride at this one spot. I had been to this mountain before, but it wasn't one of my usual trails, so I wasn't super familiar with it. I was familiar enough with it though to where I would be okay going down the trails I had done in the past. Upon getting there, I was getting my pack ready when I met this girl who was doing the same. We started talking and hit it off pretty well. At the time, she honestly seemed like someone I could be friends with. She introduced me to her boyfriend, who was also a mountain biker. Once again, there were no red flags and they were very friendly. They both seemed to be my age. They asked me if I wanted to take a ride with them down their favorite trail. I didn't see any harm in it, and I wanted to learn the area better for potential future rides. So the trail we did was one that I had never been on before. After biking down a portion of the mountain road, we stopped briefly to take a water break, and then I noticed that the girl had strategically left her backpack open. She had closed it, but then opened it back up a little bit. It seemed harmless then, but makes more sense now. Without any sort of warning, while I was taking a pee break in the trees, the two of them started laughing and took off. I was in a compromised position, so I had to hurry up and conclude my business to be able to catch them. By the time I made it back to my bike, they were both completely out of sight. Not to mention, both of my tires had been slashed, so I was stranded. I sat down for about 10 minutes and decided what I would do. I grabbed my bike and started walking down the trail. After about 15 minutes of walking, I came across a wire on the trail. It was tied onto two smaller trees. Had I been riding, that wire would have easily slit my throat. But the fact that they went through the trouble of slashing my tires made me question if they set up the wire for me or not. I hadn't seen them, so this wire may have not been them, or they could have potentially left it there to try to get another rider. I honestly don't know, and I don't think much about that part anymore. Regardless, I used my Swiss Army knife to remove the wire. I wasn't able to go any further down the trail, so I pushed my bike in the opposite direction that I came from, back up towards where I started. Close to 6 miles later, I made it back to my car. There was a bike rental shop nearby that I stopped at and asked them about the two. I gave them a description of them, but I wasn't able to identify them well enough. They offered to call the police, but after the day I had, I just wanted to go home. I do regret not having them called because over the years I had always wondered if they did this to anybody else. I've never been back to that trail. I'm still a mountain biker, but I quit going alone since then, and thankfully my husband is a fellow mountain biker. It was a humid night in July when my 3 buddies and I were camping at one of our favorite spots up in the mountains. It was around midnight when we were all cracking jokes and having a good time sitting around the fire. One of my friends then went quiet and had a weird look on his face. I asked him what was up, thinking that maybe he wasn't feeling good or just needed to lay down because he was tired. But he responded by saying that he felt like someone was watching us. I told him that everything was fine and he had to just relax, and if he wanted, he could sleep in my truck. Well, later that night, we all went into our tents and I instantly passed out because I was tired. But I was woken up by my friend who I was sharing the tent with. He was sitting up with his pocket knife out and open, and he told me to be quiet and just listen. I did, and I heard leaves crunching and branches breaking, and after listening for a little while longer, it sounded like someone with boots was walking around. I got concerned because none of my friends brought or were wearing boots. After laying there for a while, the footsteps stopped right next to our tent, and we saw a figure standing there outside. As we sat there trying to figure out what to do, our best idea was to jump out of the tent and ambush the person. It sounded like a good idea at the time. So me and my buddy jumped out of the tent, and we were faced with a 6'5", 280-pound man with an unkempt beard and hair. After standing in front of the man for a second, my friend took off running towards the truck as I tried to follow. I crashed into the tent where my other friends were sleeping when I did so. As I was laying on the ground in fear, I saw that the man was holding a machete, so I yelled, "Get the gun!" We didn't have a gun, it was just a bluff. Well, my bluff worked, and the man dropped his machete and took off into the woods. We didn't hesitate and instantly got to the truck. After going back to the house to calm down and get more sleep, the next morning we all went back to the spot fully armed to collect our gear and ready for anything. Once we got to the spot, we found the machete, and after following the tracks for a bit, we also found a mini axe. We all agreed to never go back to that spot after that night. I had a hunting lease in a stretch of mountains a few hours from anywhere you'd call a town. The access road was barely a road, just 2 tire tracks cutting through brush and rock. There was an old cabin on the property that I didn't use at all or stay in. I would just do day hunting trips or sleep in my truck if I did go multiple days. It wasn't even a cabin, more like a one-room shack with a stove and a broken cot. Someone had used it years ago, maybe even decades ago. I went alone most weekends that fall. My trips would include no cell phone signal, no other hunters, no noise except wind, and whatever animals were out there. The only thing that was slightly off that I had ever noticed before my most recent trip was that the door to the shack would sometimes be wide open when I arrived. I would always close it if it was open, but the door didn't lock or have a latch, so I figured the wind or animals might force it open occasionally. The last time I went to this spot was late in the season. I hiked out before sunrise and set up along a narrow draw where I had seen tracks crossing a shallow creek. For a while, everything was normal. Birds calling, small animals moving through the brush, but at one point it must have gradually stopped. I didn't notice things quieting down, but now everything was quiet. I remember thinking that it felt like when the power goes out in a house, how everything suddenly feels wrong. I stayed longer than I should have. I kept expecting things to go back to normal, but they didn't. I started to feel like I was being watched. I climbed down and decided to head back early. It wasn't worth sitting up there any longer. The walk back uphill was slow going. I kept looking over my shoulder without really knowing why. About halfway up, I got that feeling again, stronger this time. I stopped and turned around. The light was fading slightly, but I noticed something standing in the trail below me. It wasn't human, and it looked as if it was a deer standing on its back legs, but it was also seemingly too tall to be a deer. I couldn't make any other details out other than that, but it seemed to be facing me, staring up the trail. I raised my rifle at first, ready to fire a shot, but decided against it. I kept going up the trail, nearly walking backwards, going as fast as I could without running. When I got back to the shack, the door was open again, and it had been closed when I had left hours prior. I got my gear in the truck and left as soon as possible. I never went back, and I let the lease run out.